It's so great to be back at the 92nd Street Y. You know, um, if you've met Jonathan's mother, which I have, there's this way in which you get lured into taking Jonathan Capehart for granted, because you meet his mother, Margaret, and you don't have any questions about why he's so smart and elegant and charming and ultra cool, because it's all right there in Margaret. And then I read this book and I realize how much I've been taken for granted. I just love this book. I urge this book on you. And with this one, I really do want to begin, Jonathan, with the title and the subtitle. Mm-hmm. That it's not, neither one of them are obvious.
Oh, this is actually like a Lawrence O'Donnell interview. So, so Lawrence, Yet Here I Am was not the original title of the book. The original title was Black Boys Like Me. And I'm not going to tell you where that is in the book, but when I wrote it, the first time I wrote it, I thought, I think this should be the title. But it wasn't until I brought on Paul Bogards, and the first thing he said is, "Gotta change the title." And then he said, "We gotta change the cover. We need a modern cover."
Did he say why you have to change the title?
He didn't specify flat out, but what I read was Black Boys Like Me would wedge my book into a certain niche. Mm-hmm. And he felt, after having read the manuscript, that we wanted to guarantee it to have a broader audience. Mm-hmm. And that's why the title is more generic than Black Boys Like Me, but the subtitle goes right there, mm-hmm. Lessons from a Black Man's Search for Home. So he says, and we need an up-to-date photo, brand new photo. He says we should hire Beowulf Sheehan, which we do. He asks for the manuscript. We send it. We get on the phone, and he says, and I don't know if any of you know Beowulf, but he's spectacular. And he gets on, he's very, very measured and calm when he speaks, and he says, "I know you're looking for a new title, and I actually think the title should be the very last sentence, and yet here I am." And the moment he said it, even now a chill went through me, because it says everything that I say in the book. And so Lessons from a Black Man's Search for Home really is sort of the subtext of the book. When you read it, there are lessons that I talk about that I learned going through this journey, and that I hope people will pick up on. Because originally this book was supposed to be lessons, but the lessons didn't quite work as chapter titles because the chronology was mm-hmm. ping-ponging all over the place. And so I sprinkled them throughout the book.
Yeah, that publisher concept of lessons always feels a bit forced, you know, when you're trying to force a lesson into a chapter title and the whole thing. And the flow is just beautiful. So this is your first book tour, and your first book tour, first national book tour, begins yesterday on the Today Show. And when I saw that, I was left wondering where we would be tonight, where you would have been yesterday. Would there ever have been a Jonathan Capehart on the Today Show if you didn't have that really powerful uncle who worked at NBC News, who did that whole Nepo thing for you? Tell us about how McKinley got you in the door.
So my uncle McKinley Branch was only powerful in that if something went wrong in your office at 30 Rock, a light bulb blew out, there was a short in the wall or something like that, you called the shop. And my uncle was an electrician. He was there for 41 years and passed away during the pandemic. And so I'd been a Today Show NBC nerd my entire life. Since I was 10 years old, I was watching the Today Show. And one day I was staying with my aunt and uncle who lived in the Bronx. And he said, "I'm going to work, turn on NBC, because today's show is doing something on the plaza. I'm going to find the camera, and I'm trying to get in line. And so at the time, I was a tattletale. I told everybody's business, everybody, whether they asked me or not. So here I am watching this show on NBC of all these people telling other people's business. And it was fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
They traveled the world, they told you things. And so I just started watching the Today Show, collecting all the stories on NBC and NBC News. And so fast forward to my senior year in high school, I have my Carleton College interview. Carleton is in Minnesota. But they had interviews for East Coast students, prospective students at the Hilton. So I'm just up the street from 30 Rock. I call my uncle and I say, hey, I'm just up the street, can I come visit? Which I used to do from time to time. He said, sure. I get to the building, I go upstairs. He says, you're just in time, there's some work to do in the nightly news office. Why don't you come with me? Or no, do you want to come with me? This is a rhetorical question because he knew.
Right.
So I get there and I'm thinking,
So the choice was hang here in the shop
Right.
alone or go to
or
nightly.
go to nightly. So
I get it.
Yeah, so I went to nightly, and he sits me on this sofa, smack in front of this lady who is at her desk, drinking a coffee in sort of the Greek diner coffee cup, a bagel, and had one of the tabloids spread out on her desk. And I sat there looking at her like this, working up the courage to talk to her. And so finally I asked her if she worked there. She said, yes. And she told me her name, Ann Skakel-Tarian. And then she told me she was a producer on Nightly and told me whatever she did. I don't remember, because the next question was, you see this kid in front of you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, first, I want to be Moscow correspondent for NBC News. Then I'm trying to decide between NBC News London, the London Bureau, or the White House. But if I go to the London Bureau, I want to then go to the White House, because, I need that international cred to then cover the White House. And then my ultimate goal, I want to come back to New York and be anchor of the Today Show. Yeah, we're all laughing now, and I can only imagine the look on her face. But then my uncle comes back and says, it's time to go. I thanked her and got up, and she said, wait a minute. She opened a drawer, pulled out an NBC notepad, wrote down the name, Kay Bradley, her phone number, and with the flourish, ripped the paper off. Here, get yourself an internship on the Today Show. And that is how that started my journey.
So I do have a stylistic question about that conversation. So you're a high school senior.
Yeah.
Just how poised and confident are you in that conversation? Because when I was a high school senior, if you assigned me the job of talking to an adult, I don't know that I would have come up with 2 sentences.
Remember I said I sat on that sofa like this.
Yeah.
Staring at her. But something said to me, talk to her. Just ask a question. Just do something, just compelled me to ask her the question. And I don't know what was compelling me, but I am so glad it did, because it just set off a series of events that led to, the life lessons that I started to learn. I mean, that is, I had to initiate the conversation, but one of the lessons is, talk to anyone who wants to talk to you. Never know where it leads.
And ask for help is another one of your lessons.
Yes, ask for help, but the real big lesson is whenever anyone asks you what you want, tell them.
Now, okay, so there's other interesting thing in your answer that I think is that a lot of people, including me, I think, through most of my life, if you ask me what I want, my answer would have been a target below what I want. I would have been maybe too reluctant or embarrassed or not think, it won't be taken seriously if I say this one up here, so I'm going to pick this one here. Your advice is, no, say Moscow correspondent, White House correspondent, anchor of the Today Show.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It requires a certain naivete also. especially when you're that young.
Yeah.
But let me give you an example of my putting that lesson into action when I was a full-fledged adult. We won the Pulitzer on the Daily News editorial board in 1999. The myth is you win the Pulitzer, your phone rings off the hook with job offers. Everyone wants you to work for them. That was not the case for any of us on the editorial board. And so
New York Daily News.
New York Daily News. So I started.
And what was the Pulitzer awarded for?
Oh, the Pulitzer was for editorial writing, a series of editorials to save the Apollo Theater in Harlem. So there I am thinking, well, maybe I should lay the groundwork for doing something else. And so I talked to a lot of people. One friend consistently said, you should talk to Bloomberg News. Why do I want to talk to Bloomberg News? It's financial news. It's numbers and stuff. I do politics. And so finally he impressed upon me, no, you should go talk to them. I set up a meeting with the then head, the creator, the founder of Bloomberg News, Matt Winkler. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong that day. My 2 good interview suits at the cleaners, it was down.
He's got more than 2 now.
Yeah, it was a downpour. We lived in the meatpacking district, so no cabs, subway, hot and damp, no umbrella. I get to 499 Park Avenue where Bloomberg was headquartered, soaked, completely soaked. The cuff in my pants was dripping water into my shoes. I get up to the floor where Bloomberg News was, and I can only imagine the swirl of rage on my face as I muttered obscenities to myself for getting into this situation. I also was about 20 to 30 minutes late. But I used this newfangled technology called a cell phone to let them know I was going to be late. So he gives me a tour of the newsroom. You know, here's the terminal, and we do this, and there's all this information, and that they cover commodities, and they cover oil, and they do this. And I thought, I don't really care about any of this. So he takes me to a conference room, sits down, and says, so what do you think? I said, about what? And he said, about working here. Mind you, I went into this thinking, 1, I don't want to work here, and 2, this is just an informational conversation. And I said, well, I don't think that'd be a good idea because I don't write about economics or finance or anything. I just do politics. And so he got mad. And he looked me in the eye and he said, so what do you want to do? And then leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Now just imagine he had glasses and a bow tie and the whole thing, looked at me like this. And I thought, all right, mofo, I don't want to work here. Fine, what do I want to do? And I looked him in the eye and I said, I want to write a column once a week and go on television and talk about it like I do right now. And then I leaned back, folded my arms.
Oh, okay.
Because what did I have to lose? I mean, as much as I wanted to leave the Daily News, I loved being there. And I sat back, folded my arms, and we had this staring contest, which he broke by saying this, well, why can't you do that here? We just started an opinion section on the Bloomberg terminal. We just hired 2 guys to do a radio show. We're going to do this whole thing. He then redoes the tour, but from the perspective of wanting to hire me as a columnist. I freaked out and left. I said, oh my God, look at the time, gotta go. He goes, well, let's stay in touch. I was sure. By the end of that week, I had a new job, national affairs columnist, Bloomberg News, and tripled my salary.
Yeah.
But that was not me aiming here. That was me. He asked me what I wanted. I told him, and he gave it to me.
When you were, let's hear it. So when you were sitting there on the sofa at NBC as a high school senior, and the end point of this career curve you're describing is you're going to end up on the Today Show. Would you have dreamed that dream if Bryant Gumbel were not on the Today Show every morning when you were watching?
Yes, because keep in mind, my wanting to be on the Today Show predated his becoming co-anchor of the Today Show. When I started watching the Today Show, it was Tom Brokaw and Jane Pauley. And so the fact that they were not black did not deter me from thinking that, oh yeah, I can do this job. But when they named Bryant Gumbel co-anchor of the Today Show, when Tom Brokaw became anchor of Nightly News, it was the first time I was like, oh wait, he looks like me. This guy is black. So hell yeah, it is possible. And so, being able to watch Bryant and, the pride that filled me watching this person, an exemplar, was superb. So then to actually go and be an intern on this show and be able to see my hero every day and watch him stand on the set on my feet for 90 minutes. That was when the Today Show was only 2 hours, 7 to 9. But I would stand on the set from 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. and sometimes until 10, watching pre-tapes and all sorts of things, as I wanted to know what was happening on the set when things weren't happening on television. And it just opened my eyes when I watched from home. It was like, oh, they're going to John Palmer at the news desk. So I know right now, Bryant and Jane are walking across the set to the sofas and they're getting ready for whoever's got the next interview.
And each of them just were the flawless version of that job, just each of them. The dedication of this book is, of course, to your mother, which was not even slightly surprising to see that. There's a story in here that you really have to read because every word of it, every adjective, every speck of it is so beautifully described. And it is the moment when your mother meets Barack Obama.
Oh.
Tell us about that.
So, mind you, my mother, Margaret Capehart, had been to the White House a couple times before. The first time she went was as my date to the state dinner for the president of South Africa that the Clintons were hosting. And she had a ball, time of her life. She had been to...
I just want to insert one thing here. I'm still waiting for my first invitation to a state dinner under any presidency, anywhere. Please, proceed.
Did I mention that was my first state dinner? So anyway, I get married. My husband, Nick, comes along with me to some of the holiday parties at the White House. So he and my mom alternate. My mother comes with me as my date, and it's her first time coming to the White House with the Obamas in the White House. And we get down the stairs. We're in the diplomatic receiving, the map room, waiting, and a military aide comes over and takes our cards and asks, how do you want to be introduced? And he sees my mother's card, and he says, excuse me, ma'am, do you want all three names said? And she said, no, just say Margaret Capehart. And I said, no, please say all three names. And my mom says, I don't want all three names said. And I looked at the mill aide, and I looked at him, and I said, please say all three names, thank you. And my mom, why are you so insistent? And I said, Mom, because I want the President of the United States to hear the family names said in the White House. And she goes, oh, I get it. So we make our way up. They take her purse, and they take the purses from women so that their hands aren't full when you get to meet the President and First Lady. And so you then are single file in the way you're going to be announced. And we are on deck. There's a couple in front of us, and then it's us. And my mom is behind me, and something told me, just check on her, turn to see. And I looked at her, but she wasn't even looking at me. She was looking at them. And she had this look in her eyes as if she were looking at unicorns. never in her life did she think a black person would be elected president of the United States. And yet there she was looking at them and she was about to meet them. And it was just this, I'll never forget it, this look of amazement and awe. Like she couldn't believe this was going to happen. And then they announced Mr. Jonathan Capehart and Mrs. Margaret Kindred Capehart. And we go, and I say to Mr. President, thank you, First Lady. My mother gets up. She says hi. She trips over the rug, but the president caught her. And stand up, and then, I have posted this photo on my Instagram feed, but in the photo that we take with the Obamas, you see the awe on her face in that picture. She is smiling harder than I have ever seen her smile in her life. And she's got her arms around the president, she's got her arms around me, and I think as I write, she is in the land of the unicorns. She is in awe, absolutely in awe.
And she is one of those people who, and I've seen her in that very situation in the White House. She's one of those people who looks like she belongs here. It's not, there are people who come through and people who bring relatives through at those events, and they kind of, it's very clear that this is a very, unique experience for them. But to no one in the White House that night or any other time, I think you've been seen out socially with your mother, I don't think any of us were ever looking at her and ever having anything like the thought that you get to learn in this book, which is that you are the very first in your lineage to have never picked cotton.
I was born 3 years to the day after the signing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The next year was the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And so with that law, with the Voting Rights Act, that meant for the first time in our nation's history, the Constitution fully applied to African Americans. And so that meant my cousin and I, when we were running around playing, outside the house and with the wagon and climbing the pecan tree and everything, as I was writing this, I remembered the stories that my mom would tell and my grandmother and my aunts and uncles about how they picked cotton, and some picked tobacco. And they picked cotton because that's how they made money. And I think we were coming from my grandmother's funeral, and we were driving past the cotton fields, and my aunt Elsie said, remember that time when Annie, she was the youngest girl in the family, she had to pick cotton, and someone had to carry her bag. Or another story about how they would, pick the cotton and then add water to it because you got paid by the weight of the cotton. This is my mother, my aunts, uncles, within their lived memory. And I didn't have to do that at all. And so, that's why the South and North Carolina and the summers that I spent there were they really are foundational to how I see the world, see our country, see our politics. I think a lot of people tend to think that the civil rights era was way back then, like the dinosaur era. And I think a lot of people need to understand that this civil rights history is not history for millions of people who live in this country. It's history that they actually lived. And it's history that I get to hear about from people who aren't removed from it by generations. They're right there. They're my aunts and uncles.
Just describe your mother's life road from picking cotton to New Jersey, nursing school, this son.
Me. So Severn, North Carolina is a town so small that if you go on Google Maps, you have to like hit that plus sign until it won't go anymore so that you start to see the outlines of the streets. When I was going there during the summers, there's a major boulevard, Main Street, that went down, fully paved, wide, big, beautiful houses on either side. That was the white side of town. Immediately, the next street over was where my grandparents had their house, and a lot of other black families, and it had no name. It wasn't even paved. It was a dirt road when I was there in the younger years. And when you looked out the back door of...
Can I just pause you there? A common experience for black people in the South, their street, their road, their address, having no name.
Right.
Yeah.
No name.
No street name.
You had a post office box.
Yeah.
So you went downtown to the post office and went to your box to get your mail. But out the back door, you could see the white side of town. Out the back door of my grandparents' house, you saw what's called the White Church. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know the real name of that church until I started writing this book. It's like, well, actually, what is the name of the church? And so this was a town where, as I write in the book, when my mom drove me down every summer, she always took that first right. The second right would take us to the once no-name street, dirt road. But the first right took you down the main boulevard. And my mom driving down that main boulevard, she wasn't just driving any car, she was driving a Mercedes convertible. Hers, not rented, hers. And I took that to mean, as I got older, that this was Margaret Kindred telling the people of Severn that the woman who cleaned their homes, her daughter is back in town with her German ride and her nursing degree, and later on her bachelor's and master's, and bringing her little bald-headed kid for the summer. That is the town my mother grew up in. She went to nursing school, as you said. She moved up north with my father, and my father passed away 2 years after they got married.
And talk about your substitute fathers, your uncle, your grandfather, the people who stepped in and what they meant to you.
So my Uncle Johnny and my Granddaddy Willie, these are the two men on my father's side of the family. And so whenever I was down south, you'll see I have a chapter, the title is Jehovah's Summer Intern, because my grandmother was a Jehovah's Witness. I left that part out.
It's pretty great.
And so they would come and pick me up and take me to the Capehart side of the family, which is in a town called Coleraine, North Carolina, probably 50 miles or so east of Severn, another small town, slightly larger, but still small. And instead of, the Kingdom Hall with the Jehovah's Witnesses, I was at a thumping Baptist church where the Capehart family went, where my father is buried to this day, and my grandfather and my uncle would take me around to my father's friends and family and introduce me to them as, this is Sonny Boy's boy, because my father's nickname was Sonny Boy. And they made sure that they stayed in my life. Even though, my father died, I'd left this part out, my father died when I was 4 months old. So I never knew him. And they wanted to ensure that I knew that I had a Capehart side of the family. And
how important, we all have the advantage and disadvantage of where we're from. You have a dual advantage here. You grew up in a northern city that gives you that northeastern urban perspective, but you have this really important North Carolina part of your upbringing. So for you, the South is not the other. It's not this thing that the rest of us who've never lived in the South look at from some distance and spend our lives wondering about. I imagine that North Carolina upbringing, combined with your New Jersey upbringing, leaves you among the least surprised about what our national politics are capable of because of the duality of those perspectives and how different they are.
Right. That is true. Also, reading up a lot to fill in the holes and fill out the context of what's going on. That's why, I mean, I was shocked that Trump won the first time, but not really. And then certainly not surprised the second time he won. Because, you can't, to your point, you can't know these regions and know the history and not know what is capable, what the American people are capable of in this country, especially when it comes time to vote. And, it is my hope that, what is that, who had that saying that you can always count on the American people to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other options?
Yeah.
And someone mentioned that during this last presidential election, and I remember thinking, oh hell, they might be right. And it could be the election of Donald Trump could be that thing before we do the right thing. And that was when I thought, oh, dear Jesus, I hope I'm wrong.
The writing, you had some writing inspirations for this book. There are some things you read at certain points that when you put them down, they opened your eyes to what you might be able to do with a book like this.
So, I grew up watching, what was it, E.T. entertainment television. Remember in the 80s and the 90s, and you see, when you're a little kid, you're thinking, or lifestyles of the rich and famous, didn't realize that all that stuff was manufactured, and manufactured for the cameras. And so I had this notion of nothing's real. And so if I'm reading someone's book, more often than not, it's like, this can't possibly be real. I don't feel any connection here. It's all manufactured. I remember someone mentioned to me, I remember meeting some guys from the Washington Post when I was at the Gay Journalist Convention. And so I thought, the publisher of the Washington Post has a biography out. I should read it before I meet any of these folks if I ever get a chance to meet them. So I read Katharine Graham's Personal History. If you have not read it, I highly recommend it because reading it, it opened my eyes simply because here was this woman who was the most powerful woman in journalism and one of the most powerful women in the country and the publisher of the Washington Post. And in these pages, she is vulnerable and raw and introspective. She writes about her fraught relationship with her mother, terrible relationship with her mother, how clueless she was about how privileged she was. She tells this incredible story about getting to college and having one of her roommates go to her and say, you might want to wash that sweater, because she wore it every day, when she was a kid, she wore it was her favorite sweater. She wore it, took it off, left it on the floor. The next morning she woke up, it was in the drawer.
Right.
She never understood how it got from the floor to the drawer. Yeah. The fact that this person would write this about herself said to me, you know what? One, I loved reading it because it made her human. It made her approachable. It made this powerful, powerful woman someone that a young black gay guy, could look to and say, wow, I can understand why she felt that way, because I felt that way before. Fast forward 2 decades, I read Charles Blow's memoir, Fire Shut Up in My Bones. 2 decades later, same thing. Raw, vulnerable, introspective, And as I read that now as a more full-fledged adult, I began to understand why Charles's columns for the New York Times were so passionate.
Fiery.
Fiery.
It's right there in the title.
Right. And so I thought, if I ever write a book, if I ever write a memoir, because I knew it would have to be a memoir because I had the stories of the South percolating in my head for years. I thought my memoir would have to be as open, as honest, as vulnerable, as raw as they were. Because certainly if Kay Graham can, then I should. And, it wasn't hard to do that. People have asked me, oh my God, you're so brave. I'm not brave. I mean, if you've read my columns over the years, I have put myself in my columns for a couple decades now, but not like this. This is completely different, and I think you will understand that after you've read chapter 1.
You tell the story in the book of coming out to your mother. Was that your most difficult moment with your mother?
No, not at all. I sort of manipulated my mother into asking me if I was gay. I was sitting on my futon. So I graduated college. I worked at the college for a year. Got a job at WNYC as assistant to the president. And my mom divorced my stepfather, and now we're back in my childhood home in Hazlitt, New Jersey. And I'm sitting on my futon, and my mom was angry with me. Because, coming back from school, I was correcting her language about things and using my liberal arts education. And so she comes to me and she says, ever since you've come back from college, you've become so liberal.
Right.
And so there I'm sitting.
I have to say, when you're reading this account, the way that word lands is just spectacular, because you really don't know what's going to be at the end of that sentence. Liberal.
Liberal. And so I just started monologuing about, people and can't we all just get along, but stuff like that, right? And so then I said, for instance, gay people, they're everywhere. And sometimes I just want to say to them, your neighbors and coworkers and this, that, and the other, and stop being this. And she looks at me, because, it's a lob. And I'm hoping that she catches on. And she does. And then she says, well, are you gay? And so now, there I am, sitting in the middle of my futon, with what feels like a spotlight on me, because now it's the moment of truth. I've been in this position many times where now I'm going to tell her. But now, I find out she's asked the question. And I just look at her and I say, yes. And the first thing she says is, why? I was like, I don't know why. I don't know why, and also, it's not your fault, so don't even go down that road. But then the next thing she said to me this was 1990, next thing she said was, don't tell anyone. It'll ruin your career. And I just looked at her and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna lead with it. I'm not gonna, if someone asks me, I'll tell them, but come on, I've got a big neon sign over my head, so it's not a mystery. But when I talk to younger LGBTQ folks, particularly kids, I tell them, in 1990, this was a different country. You had people in every profession who were closeted. I remember meeting tons of investment bankers and lawyers who by day they were in the closet and by night they were at Uncle Charlie's or the Monster or whatever the gay bars were back then. I hear someone remembers Uncle Charlie's. And I just looked at her and I said, I don't know if I can do that, because I have to be honest and true to myself. If someone's going to ask me the direct question, I couldn't possibly lie. Because to me, it's plainly apparent.
And what was her settling in period with this knowledge? When did she, how long did it take for her to be comfortable?
A long time.
Yeah.
It took a long time. But remember, it was just me and my mom until I was 16 years old. So we were in art very close. In a lot of ways, the way we interact were more like siblings, like who squabble and fight and get on each other's nerves and have a time limit for how long we could be with each other before one's tripwire is hit. So even in the rough periods, we were still close. But it wasn't until, and this goes back to the power of the Obamas. My mother's a born-again Christian. I left that part out. She is a born-again Christian. So that
and born again before you tell her that you're gay.
Right. She became a born-again Christian during her marriage.
So it's kind of the most resistant moment for life where you could bring it up.
Right. And so there we are, Mother's Day weekend, he was running for re-election, so it's 2012.
Yeah.
And he does the interview with Robin Roberts. After, then Vice President Biden comes out for same-sex marriage on Meet the Press. And here I am with my mom on Mother's Day, she's looking cute with her fascinator on. And I asked her, I said, Mom, did you see the president's comments about same-sex marriage? She said, yes, I did. Well, what did you think? What do you think of what he said? Oh, well, I agree. I agree with him. I just think that it's so unfair. People are together and then these family members can just swoop in and take the houses and stuff like that. It's cruel. I sat in amazement, absolute amazement. But in that moment, that is when I truly understood the power of President Obama. That man changed my mother's mind. And as I write in the book, if Obama is for it and Michelle wore it, my mother is all for it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. All right, we have the audience questions.
We're at that point
Okay, Ernest has a good question. As someone who grew up, as you put it, telling everyone's business, can you talk to us about how it feels to tell the world your business and why now? And Ernest is very polite. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ernest. Like I said before, the stories about North Carolina were percolating in my head. And during the first Trump term, I just couldn't watch any more news. I couldn't read anything else. I just needed an escape. And so one day, I just decided, I'm going to write down the North Carolina stories. The Jehovah, going with my grandmother on the dusty roads in North Carolina, witnessing to almost always African Americans. Miss Betsy, the one white woman who was my grandmother's friend who would go to the Kingdom Hall with my grandmother, but we had to pick her up in the dark middle of nowhere because her husband was a racist and didn't know she was a Jehovah's Witness and certainly wouldn't like the fact that her best friend was a black woman. So whenever Miss Betsy called, you would always hear silence and then some heavy breathing and then where she was, and then she would hang up. And then we would pull over to wherever she was and then just wait. And Miss Betsy would pop out of nowhere and come running into the car. So I'm writing all of these stories down. And as I'm writing, I feel like I'm getting into a rhythm of storytelling. And I love writing, and I love reading good writing. And I thought, this is good. So I sent it out to a few people. I sent it out to April Ryan, Joy Reid, Tamron Hall, and I think one other person, but those three for sure, sent it to them. And each one sent emails back saying, "This is so good. I can see it. Keep going." And so I kept going. And that was in 2017. And remember, I had Kay Graham and Charles Blow on either shoulder saying, "Okay, you're writing these, but keep going." And once I got the book deal, and 60% of it was written, but the 40% that I had to write honestly were the toughest 40%, where I had to sit in a lot of memories, in a lot of things that I discovered, and then write what I knew, how it fit into the narrative, and then how it felt. My friend Richie Jackson, who wrote Gay Like Me, a letter to his son, he said to me, "Jonathan, put yourself on every page. Make sure you put yourself on every page." So between a real desire to be honest and open and introspective, I also needed to make sure that I did all those things in all those tough places. And in doing so, it's not easy writing the things that I write about, and you'll know what I mean when you read the book. But I also know from the columns that I've written that when I am that vulnerable, that open and honest, that is when I hear from people who say, "I never saw it that way. Thank you for opening my mind. Thank you for educating me." And specifically thinking of the times when I wrote about all the times unarmed African American men were being shot by police and vigilantes, and talking about why that is so scary for Black people writ large, no matter what they're doing. Living while Black could cost you your life. And so in writing honestly about that, I helped people. And so my hope is, by being as raw and open and honest in my own story, that people will see parts of themselves or parts of their experience, even if they're not Black, even if they're not LGBTQ. But we're all living a life, and we've all gone through heartache, hardships, failures. I write all about my failures. But I also write about what I learned. And it's my hope that in going on the journey with me in the book, you will find lessons in there that maybe will be of help to you.
There's, I think one of the things you are dealing with on every page of this book is, I think, the single most difficult thing I ever had to deal with in writing, which was one of the very first things I wrote, involved, my family was in the story. So I had to write about members of my family, and then also people I was close to in the world. And I just found that incredibly difficult, because what I found was I didn't have the option of deception. The only way to write this, you can't, it's hard enough to write when you're being honest. The harder way, I think, would be to try to write when you're being dishonest or trying to cover something up, because the honest thing is right there. And you worry about how this will land and who will be offended and who will be angry. Did you have that in this process, those kinds of concerns about, here I am in this story, he's not going to want to hear this, and she's not going to want to read that, but I have to write it?
I had that fear most about my mother. She is the person closest to me. And again, this is my story, my memoir, and really my mom and me and my mom's side of the family, but they don't factor as prominently as you would think. So when I the publisher asked to have the first 10 chapters, the first draft of the 10 chapters. And I got them done, and I thought, okay, well, I should probably have my mom read the 10 chapters. I was grudging it. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have her read this, and I don't need another editor. And so I emailed her, and I said, do you want to read the 10 chapters? And she wrote back, no. Oh. And I thought, praise Jesus. But then she wrote back a few minutes later, actually, I changed my mind. Yeah, send the chapters. And I just said, God. Then she FaceTimed me a couple minutes later, and she said, you know what? Don't send them to me. I don't want to see them. I said, what? I said, no, I don't want to see them. I'll read it when it's published.
Yeah.
And I said, wow, thank you, but why? And she said, I know me. I will read something, I'll get upset, and that's all I'll think about while you're writing. And I was like, okay, well, I'll take that. Thank you. Thank you, Mom. Wow. So that is the only person, of course, my mom said to me, after I told her that I got the contract, she said, don't write anything that'll embarrass your family.
Right.
Like, well,
that's the commandment to all writers.
Right, but as I said before, no one else in the family really factored into what I was thinking about writing. Now, that doesn't mean I don't write about other family, but in my journey in this book, my memories of them, with the exception of my former stepfather, were all positive. Mm-hmm. And so, when you've got a huge positive memory about a particular relative, whatever picayune stuff they did that pissed you off when you were a little kid or something they said doesn't matter when you're trying to tell a bigger story. So I am eagerly awaiting my mother's review. She did read chapter 1. She said chapter 1 made her very sad. Mm-hmm. Which I understand why, and you'll understand why once you've read it. But my mom is really waiting for the audio book.
Yeah.
So she'll listen to it while she's walking.
Well, I have a tip for your mother. Tonight, at 10 p.m. on MSNBC, Jonathan Capehart will be one of my guests, and one of my very favorite things to do is, instead of reading passages of the book myself, I use the audiobook, and we're gonna do that tonight. We're gonna use a piece of audiobook in the show.
Which piece?
It's not 9 o'clock yet. This question goes to your current occupation as a knower of all things political, and so we're going to step out of the book for a final question here. The question is, how would you rate the Biden presidency in historical terms, and how will Joe Biden be remembered? And now, Jonathan, I know you want to sell books to every person here, but let me tell you how to sell a book in this answer to Patrick, who has signed this question. Patrick, Biden fan in Manhattan. Go ahead.
Well, Patrick, thank you for that question. I think the Biden presidency will be viewed as perhaps one of the most successful presidencies in American history. And I say that without reservation. I say that having watched the man, watched his presidency, as we both have. Unlike a lot of people in our profession, I've had the chance to interview the president twice. You've interviewed him twice.
Yeah.
At least, as president. And the thing that enrages me more than anything is this notion that he was not mentally fit or capable to be in the Oval Office. I interviewed the man in October 2022 when he negotiated with the Republicans from the well of the House of Representatives who tried to heckle him. A mentally addled man could not do that. And when I interviewed him, it was the Joe Biden I had interviewed when he was vice president, when he was a senator. Fast forward to March of 2024, again, after a State of the Union address. And it's 2 years later, he's 2 years older, and sure, he's 80-something years old. He's an old man, but he's an old man with a sharp mind. And it was always a joy to talk with him because he loves a conversation, he loves to talk about the issues, and for all those who were wondering about, oh my God, is he up for the job? Just go back to that press conference he did after the G20 or G7 in Washington, D.C., a press conference that went on more than an hour when everyone was talking about, the mental decline, and he should take a mental acuity test. David Sanger of the New York Times conducted a mental acuity test in front of the entire world when he asked a long, multi-part question about some policy disagreement with the Chinese over something I can't even explain or remember. But the President of the United States took that question and went on for more than 5 minutes, taking each piece of David's question and answering it. And if President Biden had not answered that question to David Sanger's satisfaction, we all know David Sanger would have written that in the New York Times. He would have been duty-bound to point that out. I have yet to see that story. So for all of those people who are turning their attention on the president, President Biden, trying to blame him and his administration for the hell that we are going through now in this country and this democracy, they're focused on the wrong person. He's not the reason.
So we are 2 hours away from me staring into a camera on
He's got to get to work.
On live television with, at this point, nothing to say. I know it looks like I'm making it up as I go along, but it's actually written, and I haven't written a word. And so we've got to go do this. I tell people, it's one of the things I say all the time, just kind of, I love Jonathan. I love Jonathan Capehart. I love Jonathan Capehart. It's just a matter of fact. It's just a fact of my life, right? And what I love about this moment right now is that now you know why I love Jonathan Capehart, and this book will tell you more. Thank you very, very, very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.